The wind off the Rockies carried the smell of coming snow. It was September in Colorado, the year 1923, and the light had that particular quality of autumn evenings, gold and heavy slanting through the pine trees like something you could touch. Nathaniel Bridger sat in his chair on the porch of the ranch house, his hands folded in his lap, the knuckles thick with age and old work. He was 84 years old. His hair was white as fresh snow, his face creased deep as canyon walls. But his eyes were still sharp, still the color of winter sky. His grandson Samuel stood beside him, tall and nervous in his new Forest Ranger uniform. The boy was 19. He had his grandmother's height, his grandfather's hands. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot like a horse ready to bolt. "Grandpa," Samuel said, his voice cracked a little, "I am scared." Nate did not look at him. He kept his gaze on the mountains on the line where earth met sky, where the last light was bleeding away. "Scared of what?" Nate asked. His voice was like gravel in a dry creek bed. "Bears or being alone," Samuel swallowed. "Scared I am not strong enough. You and Grandma, you survived terrible things. You built all this." He gestured at the ranch, at the barns and fences, at the apple trees, heavy with fruit along the northern fence line. "I am just me." Nate let the silence sit between them for a moment. The wind moved through the aspens. The leaves made a sound like water running over stones. "Sit down, boy," Nate said. Samuel sat on the porch step, his back straight, hands on his knees, waiting. "I am going to tell you about your grandmother," Nate said, "about how we met, about why this land matters." Samuel turned surprised. "Grandma? But she died when I was 9. I barely remember her except she was very tall, very different." Different. Nate tasted the word like it was bitter coffee. "That is what they called her, the town folk. They called her a monster. They called me a murderer, but they did not know the truth." He reached for his pipe, packed it with tobacco from a leather pouch worn soft as skin. He struck a match. The flame reflected in his eyes. "Your grandmother was a nun, Samuel." The boy's mouth opened. No sound came out. "And I was a man running from the law. This is the story of how two outcasts found each other, and why you are standing here on this land, about to go make your own path." Nate drew on the pipe. Smoke curled up into the evening air, gray as ghosts. "It was October of 1873. I was 34 years old, had not been to a town in 5 years. His voice drifted. The present faded. The past rose up like water from a deep well. The storm came down from the north like the hand of an angry god. One moment the sky was merely gray. The next it was white, howling, erasing the world. Nathaniel Bridger felt the temperature drop 20 degrees in the space of 10 heartbeats. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Jasper, pinned his ears back and shuddered. Nate was running his trap line along the high ridges west of what the settlers called the Mission Valley. It was late in the season. Most mountain men had already come down to winter quarters. But Nate was not like most mountain men. He stayed high as long as he could, stayed where the silence was thick as wool, where he could go days without seeing another human face. That was how he preferred it, had preferred it for 5 years now, since Mary and Thomas died of cholera down in the camps near South Pass, since the world had become a place where words meant nothing and grief was just the texture of every waking moment. The wind hit them sideways. Jasper stumbled on the loose shale of the trail, his hoof catching in a cleft between two stones. The horse lurched, tried to recover, failed. They went down hard. Nate kicked free of the stirrups, an old reflex muscle memory from 1,000 rides over bad country. But the ground came up too fast. His shoulder struck first. Then his head cracked against a jutting rock. The world went white, then black, then swam back into a nauseating gray focus. He lay in the wash, the wind screaming over him. He tasted blood hot and metallic running down from his scalp into his eye. His head felt full of broken glass. When he tried to sit up, the horizon tilted like a ship in a storm. Jasper was 10 yards away, standing on 3 legs, the left foreleg hanging at a wrong angle. The horse was shaking violently, eyes white rimmed with terror. Nate forced himself to stand. His knees felt made of water. He stumbled to the horse, put a hand on the animal's neck. The gelding's coat was already slick with freezing rain. "Easy, boy," Nate whispered. "Easy now." But he could see the break. Clean through the cannon bone. There was no fixing it. Not out here, not in this storm. He pulled the revolver from his belt. His hands were shaking. It took him 3 tries to cock the hammer. Jasper looked at him with those big dark eyes. The horse had carried him for 8 years through 6 territories, had never once spooked at a rattlesnake or balked at a river crossing. "I am sorry," Nate said. His voice cracked. "I am sorry, old friend." The gunshot was loud in the white silence. Jasper dropped without a sound. Blood pooled dark on the pale stones. Nate stood there swaying. The coal was already chewing at his fingers, turning them stiff and clumsy. His coat was soaked through. His head pounded with each heartbeat. He looked around. The trail was gone, erased by wind and snow. He had no landmarks, no shelter, no horse. The cold became a voice urging him to lie down, to close his eyes, to sleep. It would be easy, easier than the last 5 years had been, easier than waking every morning to the memory of Mary's face, Thomas's laugh, the life he had lost through his own absence. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Wood smoke. Faint but real. He turned. There, through the white curtain of the blizzard, a thin dark thread rising. Someone had a fire. He began to walk. He did not know how long he walked. Time lost its shape in the storm. His feet moved on their own, each step a negotiation with his body, which wanted very much to stop. Blood crusted on his face, freezing in his beard. His fingers had gone numb. He could not feel his toes anymore. Just as the last gray light was bleeding out of the afternoon, he saw it, a shape resolving from the white. Stone walls weathered and dark. A mission church, squat and ugly and alone on a rise of land that took the full brunt of the wind. In the yard, a figure was working, chopping wood. The axe rose and fell with a rhythm that was frightening in its efficiency. The blade bit through heartwood with a crack like breaking bones, splitting logs clean. The figure was tall, broad in the shoulder, wearing a man's heavy coat and a battered hat pulled low. Nate's vision was blurring. He thought it was a man, some rancher or drifter who had claimed the abandoned mission for winter quarters. He let go of the last of his strength. He took 3 steps forward. His boots scraped loud on a rock. The figure spun. The axe came up in a smooth, defensive arc. Fast. Very fast. "Who is there?" The voice was rough, shaped by wind, but it was a woman's voice. Nate tried to raise a hand, tried to show he was unarmed. His arm felt like lead. "I need—" The words came out in pieces. "Please, I need—" The wind stole the rest. The woman stepped closer. The axe was held across her chest like a shield. She did not look frightened. She looked dangerous. Her face was carved from the same hard land as the mountains. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth set in a grim line, eyes that were dark and guarded, weighing him, calculating threat. She was tall, taller than most men, 6 feet if she was an inch. Her coat strained at the shoulders. Her hands on the axe handle were large, the knuckles slightly swollen from labor. "You are dying," she said. It was not a question. It was an assessment. Nate swayed. "Yes," he managed. "I think, yes." "Where is your horse?" "Dead. Broke his leg." She looked past him at the empty trail, looked at the blood on his face, looked at his eyes, which were starting to lose focus. He saw her hesitate, saw her look back at the mission door, then at him again, saw the war happening behind her eyes. Then she moved, not with gentleness, with grim necessity. She grabbed him. Her hands were strong, surprisingly strong. She hooked her arms under his shoulders and began to drag him toward the building. He was not a small man. He was 6 feet himself, 200 pounds of muscle and bone. She hauled him like he was a sack of grain. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth. "You are heavy as a dead steer." She kicked the door of the cabin open and dragged him over the threshold. The heat inside hit him like a physical blow. It thawed his frozen skin so fast it burned. Nate groaned. He rolled onto his back, blinking up at rough-hewn beams, at firelight dancing on the ceiling. The woman bolted the door, a heavy iron bolt, deliberate. Then she turned and looked down at him. She stripped off her heavy coat and hung it on a peg. Underneath, she wore a simple work dress made of gray wool patched at the elbows. But the dress did nothing to hide the power of her frame. She was all muscle, all strength. She knelt beside him, her face twisted slightly in distaste as she saw the blood matting his hair. "Sit up," she ordered. Nate struggled to obey. He propped himself against the leg of a heavy oak table. The room spun. He forced his eyes to focus to take in his surroundings. The cabin was sparse. No rugs, no curtains, no softened edges. It was a room built for survival, not comfort. The floor was swept clean enough to eat off. A cast iron stove dominated the center, radiating fierce heat. On a high shelf, a single photograph frame lay face down, gathering no dust. The woman returned with a basin of hot water and a clean rag. She moved with a heavy, deliberate grace. She washed the blood from his face. The water turned pink in the basin. The cloth was rough, but her touch was efficient. "Hold still," she said. "This will sting." She poured something that smelled like corn whiskey over the gash on his head. Nate hissed through his teeth. His hands gripped the table legs until his knuckles turned white. "Need to stitch it," she said. "It is deep." "Do what you have to," Nate managed. His voice sounded like gravel rattling in a tin can. She produced a needle and thread that she passed through the flame of a lantern. As she leaned in, Nate could see the fine lines of fatigue etched around her eyes. She smelled of soap and hard work and pine pitch. She began to stitch. Her hands were large, the knuckles slightly swollen from labor. But they were steady, mostly steady. As she pulled the skin together, drove the needle through, Nate felt a faint tremor in her fingers. It was subtle, a vibration of nerves, a hum of tension that contradicted the stony expression on her face. Every time he moved, even slightly, she flinched. Her body coiled tight, ready to spring away. When he shifted his hand on the floorboard, the sound was loud in the small room. Her shoulders hiked up toward her ears, her breathing quickened. She acted like a creature that had been hunted. She tied off the last stitch and bit the thread with her teeth. "Done," she said. She stood up abruptly, moving away from him, dumping the bloody water into a slop bucket. "Thank you, ma'am," Nate said. "I would have died out there." She did not look at him. She was wiping her hands on a rag, scrubbing at the skin, as if the blood were something poisonous. "Rest," she said. Her voice was flat. "There is a blanket in the corner. You sleep there. Do not come near the bed. I bolt this door at night. You try to enter my room, I shoot." Nate looked at her, seeing the wall she had built around herself. It was higher and thicker than the walls of the mission. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. He crawled to the corner where a buffalo hide and a wool blanket lay folded. He wrapped himself up. The heat of the stove was fighting the chill in his bones, but slowly. He was shaking with cold and shock and blood loss. He watched her for a long time. She sat at the table, her back to him, staring at the dark window. She did not move. She sat like a sentry, keeping watch over an empty fort. The wind howled outside. The mission walls held firm. Nate felt himself sliding into sleep, black and dreamless. His last thought was that he had been saved, but he did not yet understand the cost of that salvation or what he had stumbled into. Morning broke with a silence that was deafening after the roar of the storm. The sun came up pale and watery, illuminating a world encased in ice. Everything glittered. Everything was sharp. Nate woke with a headache that throbbed in time with his heartbeat. His mouth tasted like old copper. He sat up slowly, groaning. The room was empty, but the stove was still warm. A pot of coffee sat on the iron plate, steam rising from the spout. He poured himself a cup. His hands shook slightly. The coffee was bitter and black and strong. It scalded his throat and woke him up. He found his hat and stepped outside. The brilliance of the sun on snow made him squint. He looked out over the homestead in the harsh light of day. The desperation of the place was laid bare. The barn roof sagged dangerously on the north side, half the shingles stripped away by wind. The fences were a disaster, posts leaning at drunken angles, wire rusted and snapped in places. A small herd of perhaps 30 head of cattle huddled in the lee of a windbreak, their breath steaming in the frigid air. And there, just beyond the garden patch where dead corn stalks rattled in the breeze, he saw them. Graves, 13 of them. Raw mounds of earth against the white snow, each one marked with a rough wooden cross. No names carved into the wood. Just the crosses, gray and silent and accusatory. Nate felt something cold settle in his gut. This was not just an abandoned mission. This was a graveyard. And somewhere in this frozen place there was a woman who had buried 13 people by herself. He walked toward the barn, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. He found her there. She was struggling with a heavy hay bale, trying to hoist it up into the loft. It was a two-person job. She was doing it alone. Her face was red with exertion, her teeth gritted. She wore the same dress, the same coat. Her breath came in clouds. "Let me get that," Nate said. She spun around, startled. She dropped the bale. It hit the ground with a thud. "I told you to leave," she said. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Nate ignored her. He stepped forward, grabbed the bale with his good shoulder, and with a grunt of effort swung it up onto the loft edge. His head pounded, his vision swam. But he managed it. He turned to face her. "My horse is dead," he said, "and I cannot walk far. I need a few days to heal. And you?" He looked around the yard, gestured at the leaning posts and the sagging roof. "You need help." "I cannot feed a hand," she said sharply. "I have barely enough for the winter as it is." "I do not want wages," Nate said. He met her eyes, held them. "I will work for my keep. I can fix that roof before the next snow brings it down. I can tighten these fences." And I saw a gelding in the corral that looks like he has never had a saddle on him. "I can break him for you. A broken horse is worth 3 times what a wild one is." The woman's sister Abigail Thorne, though Nate did not yet know her name, looked at him for a long moment. Her arms were crossed over her chest. She was tall enough that she looked him straight in the eye. The wind whipped a loose strand of dark hair across her face. She brushed it away impatiently. "Why bow more?" she asked. Nate looked at his boots, then back at her. "Because I hate owing a debt. You stitched my head. You pulled me out of the storm. Let me fix your roof. Let me earn what you gave me." Abigail looked at the barn. She looked at the fence posts that she had been struggling to reset for weeks. She looked at her own hands chapped and bleeding from the cold. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that settled in the marrow and made your bones feel like lead. Winter was coming. If that roof failed, the hay would rot. If the hay rotted, the cows died. If the cows died, she starved. Pride was a warm coat, but it was not something you could eat. 3 days, she said. Her voice was hard. You fix the roof. You mend the north fence line. Then you go. Deal, Nate said. They worked in silence that first day. He climbed the barn, testing the beams, pulling away rotted shingles. She worked below, resetting posts, wrapping wire. They moved around each other carefully like animals sharing a water hole during drought. Wary, watching. At midday, she brought him water and hard bread. She did not speak, just handed him the dipper and walked away. But Nate noticed things. He noticed the way she moved, strong, competent, but always listening, always aware of where he was. Her body stayed coiled, ready to run or fight. He noticed the way she flinched when a board fell, when a crow cawed too loud when he came around a corner without warning. And he noticed the graves, 13 of them, all fresh, all dug in the last 3 years, judging by the weathering of the crosses. That evening, after the sun had set and they sat in the cabin eating beans and cornbread in silence, Nate finally spoke. "How long have you been alone, ma'am?" Abigail looked up from her plate. Her eyes were guarded. 3 years, 2 months, 11 days. Nate blinked. "That is specific. That is how long since the others died." She stood, walked to the door, and pointed out into the darkness where the graves were. 12 sisters, 1 priest, all murdered. Nate felt the words land like stones in cold water. "Indians?" he asked. "Men," Abigail said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Just men." She came back to the table. She did not sit. Priest was killed first, shot through the chest, so he could not do last rites for the others. They killed the sisters over 3 hours. I heard every scream. Her hands gripped the back of the chair. Her knuckles were white. I buried them alone, dug 13 holes in rocky ground in July, in the heat, alone. Nate looked at her, really looked at her, at the height and breadth of her, at the hands that could drag a 200-pound man through snow, at the exhaustion carved into her face. "I am sorry," he said, and he meant it. "Sorry does not plant corn," Abigail said. "Sorry does not fix fences. Sorry does not bring them back." She walked to her room. The door closed. The bolt slid home with a definitive click. Nate sat alone at the table staring at his hands. They were scarred from 1,000 small wounds. Knife cuts, rope burns, frostbite scars on the fingertips. He thought about the woman in the next room who had dragged bodies from a chapel and laid them in the ground by herself. He thought about strength, about what it cost to be strong when you had no choice. The next 2 days passed in a rhythm of work. Nate on the roof prying away bad shingles, nailing down new ones scavenged from the collapsed section of the chapel. Abigail below working the fence line, digging out old posts, setting new ones in cement made from Lyman Creek gravel. They spoke little, but they learned each other's rhythms. When he needed a board, she was there with it. When she needed wire cut, he was there with the cutters. On the third day, while Nate was repairing a section of corral fence, Abigail's sleeve rode up as she reached for a hammer. He saw them. Scars on her inner forearms. Not defensive wounds. These were parallel lines, deliberate, self-inflicted. He did not comment, but she saw him looking. She yanked her sleeve down, turned away, her shoulders hunching in shame. That evening, necessity forced a trip to town. "We are low on flour," Abigail said, "and coffee, and lamp oil." "I can go," Nate offered. "No," Abigail said. "They will ask questions. You are a stranger, and I need to go myself. The mercantile, they keep a ledger. I need to settle my account." She hesitated, then added, "If you come with me, they will say things." "What kind of things?" "The kind that hurt." Nate looked at her. "I have been called worse than most words. I will drive the wagon. You ride beside me, and if they say anything, I will handle it." "That is what I am afraid of," Abigail said. The town of Redemption was 20 miles north, a collection of clapboard buildings clustered around a muddy thoroughfare. As their wagon rolled in, Nate felt the change in the air immediately. People stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes turned to follow them. Abigail sat rigid on the wagon seat, her chin up, her gaze fixed straight ahead. But Nate saw her hands. They were white-knuckled on the seat edge, gripping so hard he thought the wood might crack. They stopped at the mercantile. The store was warm inside, smelling of dried apples and leather and tobacco. Two men were playing checkers by the stove. A group of women were examining a bolt of calico at the counter. The moment Abigail walked in, the conversation stopped. The silence was a living thing. The clerk, a thin man with a prominent Adam's apple, looked up. His expression curdled. "We do not serve your kind anymore, sister," he said. The word sister was laced with contempt. "I have coin," Abigail said. Her voice was steady. "I am buying flour and coffee." "The church said you are not a sister anymore," the clerk said. "Said you refused to leave when ordered." "The church abandoned us," Abigail said. "I stayed with my dead." "That is blasphemy," one of the checker players called out. Nate stepped forward. He placed a gold eagle on the counter. The coin rang loud. "I will buy it," he said. "She is my employer." The clerk smirked. "That's what they are calling it now." The women near the calico giggled behind their hands. One of them, a hard-faced woman in a severe gray dress, turned to her companion. "Living alone with a man," she said loud enough to carry. "It is shameful." Another woman nodded. "She should have died with the others. That is what God intended, but she fought. She killed. She is no bride of Christ. She is a widow to the devil." Abigail stood frozen. Her face burned red. She stared at the floor, wishing it would open and swallow her whole. Nate began loading flour and coffee into a sack. The clerk worked slowly, deliberately, making them wait, making the humiliation last. As they walked out, one of the men by the stove called out, "Hey, mountain man, you bedding down the nun?" Laughter erupted. "Bet she is wild under that dress. Probably got hair everywhere like an animal." More laughter. "I heard she is not built right. That is why the church did not want her. She is part man, they say." Nate stopped. He set the sack of flour down very carefully. He turned slowly. The men were grinning, confident, safe in their pack. Nate did not raise his voice. He simply looked at each man in turn. Let the silence stretch. "Any of you been up to that mission?" he asked quietly. "Seen those graves? She dug 12 holes, 6 feet deep, in rocky ground, by herself." The grins faltered. "She buried her family while you sat here drinking and playing checkers. She did the work of 6 men because she had no choice, and you call her weak." He let that sit, let it sink in. "You want to talk about what is unnatural? Look at yourselves. Soft hands, soft lives. Sitting here judging a woman who is worth 10 of any of you." He picked up the sack. walked out. The street was silent. Abigail was already in the wagon, her face turned away. Nate climbed up beside her, took the reins. They rode in silence for 2 miles before she spoke. Why did you do that? Do what? Defend me. Now they will say I have corrupted you too. Now they will say I have bewitched you or bought you or... Her voice cracked. Every time someone defends me, it just proves I am what they think I am. Dangerous. Evil. Nate kept his eyes on the road. Let them think what they want. Words do not bury themselves. You did that work alone. That is the truth. The rest is just noise. Abigail turned to look at him. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. I am so tired, she whispered. So tired of being strong. So tired of being monstrous. You are not a monster, Nate said. You are just too big for their small understanding. She looked at him, then really looked at him, and for the first time saw herself through someone else's eyes as human, not devil. They returned to find a carriage in the yard. An expensive carriage polished black with brass fittings, 2 horses in fine tack. And standing on the porch of the mission, flanked by 2 rough-looking men and Sheriff Hoskins, was a man in a silk vest. Silas Thorne. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, clean-shaven, with cold gray eyes that calculated everything. He stood with the confidence of a man who owned half the territory and was working on buying the other half. Abigail, he said, as she climbed down from the wagon. His voice was smooth as oiled leather. My dear niece, you look weathered. Abigail went very still. Uncle. Nate stepped down beside her and he did not speak, just stood there, solid and watchful. Silas noticed him. His eyes flicked up and down, assisting, dismissing. I have come to rescue you from this madness, Silas said. I do not need rescuing. Silas reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He handed it to the sheriff, who in turn handed it to Abigail. The archdiocese has sold this property to me, Silas said. You have 30 days to vacate. Abigail unfolded the paper. Her hands shook slightly. She read it once, twice. This is impossible, she said. The mission was granted in perpetuity. It cannot be sold. The church can dispose of property as it sees fit, Silas said. I purchased it legally for $2,000. The transaction is recorded. Sheriff Hoskins, a decent man caught in an indecent situation, cleared his throat. I am sorry, Miss Thorne. The paperwork is in order. But why, Abigail asked. Why would you want this place? Silas smiled. It did not reach his eyes. Silver, my dear niece. There is a vein running beneath the chapel. The assayer confirmed it. This worthless pile of rocks is worth $50,000. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You are why I became interested in mining. Did you know that I tried to sell you to Gerald Blackwood when you were 17? You would have made me a fortune as his wife. But you ran to the church like a coward. I ran from you, Abigail said, her voice shook, from being treated like property. And yet here we are, Silas said. You are still my property, niece. Family law is very clear. A woman of unstable mind can be placed under the guardianship of her nearest male relative. The threat hung in the air like smoke. He would have her declared insane, have her locked in an asylum. Take the land anyway. Sheriff Hoskins looked uncomfortable. Miss Thorne, the law says you have 30 days to contest this. You can hire a lawyer, present your case to the territorial judge. I have no money for lawyers, Abigail said. Silas was already turning to leave. He paused at his carriage. 30 days, Abigail. Then I bring the judge and a doctor to assess your mental state. I suggest you use the time to pack. The carriages rolled away, leaving dust and silence. Abigail stood holding the eviction notice. Her hands were shaking. Not with fear, with rage so potent it made her dizzy. Nate waited. He did not rush to comfort or advise. He just stood there, a solid presence. I have nowhere to go, Abigail said finally. Nowhere except... She did not finish the sentence. Did not need to. Nowhere except into Silas's power. Nowhere except back into the cage she had spent 13 years escaping. You have options, Nate said quietly. Tell me one. Fight. We go to Denver. We find the original land grant. If the church sale was fraudulent, we can prove it. Overturn this. I cannot leave. Silas will burn this place the moment I am gone. Then I go alone. No, the word came out sharp. Too sharp. Abigail grabbed at an arm. I cannot. I cannot be alone again. Not now. Not when I have finally. She stopped. Could not finish. Could not say out loud that for the first time in 3 years she had felt something like hope. That she had started to remember what it felt like to not be afraid every second. Nate looked at her hand on his arm. Looked at her face. Then we go together, he said. Both of us. If the mission burns, let it burn. You have been a prisoner long enough. Abigail released his arm. She walked into the cabin. Nate followed. She went to her small room and returned carrying a bundle. A dress, not the gray wool work dress, a real dress civilian from before she took the veil. Blue cotton with small white flowers. I kept this, she said. I do not know why. I thought I would never wear it again. She looked at Nate. If I do this, if I leave, I am breaking my vows. I am abandoning my post. The church will excommunicate me. Are you a nun because you chose it? Nate asked. Or because you had nowhere else to go? The question hung in the air. Abigail reached up. Her hands went to the wimple, the white linen cloth that covered her hair. Her fingers hesitated on the pins. Do not look, she whispered. Nate turned his back, gave her privacy. He heard the soft sound of pins being removed, heard fabric rustling, heard her breath catch. You can look now. He turned. She stood in the center of the room, head bare. Her hair was cut short, brutally short. It was growing back in uneven patches. Her scalp showed through in places marked with scars. She looked at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. When they came, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The men, before I killed them. They held me down. They cut my hair with a knife. They said I was not fit to be a bride of Christ, that I was an abomination. She touched her head, her fingers tracing the scars. I kept it short after, as a reminder of what I survived, but also of what I lost. She finally looked up at Nate. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. I was vain once. I had long hair. My mother said it was my glory. Nate stepped closer, not close enough to touch, just close enough that she could feel he was there. It is growing back, he said. That means you are healing. Abigail let out a breath she had been holding for 3 years. Help me pack, she said. Duh. They left at dawn. The sky was pink and gold, the air cold and sharp. Abigail wore the blue dress under her heavy coat. Her head was wrapped in a simple scarf. She looked strange to herself, felt naked without the habit. Nate saddled 2 horses, his bay mare that he had bought from a rancher 20 miles south, and Abigail's gray gelding that she used for wagon work. She stood for a long moment looking at the mission, at the 13 graves, at the barn and the fences, at the life she had built from grief and stubbornness. I will come back, she said to the graves, to the sisters sleeping beneath the earth. I promise, I will not let him take this. They rode east toward the rising sun, toward Denver, and whatever truth waited there. Behind them, the mission grew small against the mountains. The apple trees along the fence line, the ones Abigail had planted, caught the morning light. Their branches were bare, but in spring they would bloom. So the sun was setting over the Bridger Ranch. Samuel sat on the porch step, his head in his hands. Grace brought a blanket and draped it over her father's shoulders. That is enough for tonight, Papa, she said gently. But Nate shook his head. No, he needs to hear the rest, needs to know what came after. Samuel looked up. His face was pale. Grandpa, I did not know. I never knew Grandma was a nun. She was many things, Nate said. Nun, warrior, mother, builder. But first she had to choose to be herself. And that choice, he paused, drew on his pipe. That choice cost her everything she thought she was. What happened in Denver? Samuel asked. Nate smiled. It was a sad smile. The smile of a man remembering pain that has long since healed into wisdom. In Denver, we learned that the church had betrayed her, that her uncle had bought her grave before she was even in it, and that sometimes the law is just another word for power. He looked at his grandson. Tomorrow you ride to Montana. You will be afraid. You will be alone. But you will also be free. Free to choose. Free to fail. Free to become whoever you decide to be. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Simple gold worn smooth by decades of wearing. This was your grandmother's wedding ring. She wanted you to have it. Samuel took it with shaking hands. But Grandpa, I cannot. You can, Nate said firmly. When you doubt yourself, when you are scared, you look at that ring. And you remember you come from people who refuse to break. You are built from holy steel and mountain dirt. The stars were coming out now, the first stars of evening, the same stars that had watched over Nate and Abigail as they fled toward Denver 50 years ago, the same stars that had witnessed everything that came after. Samuel closed his fist around the ring. Tell me the rest, he said. I need to know. Nate nodded slowly. Then tomorrow before you leave, we will finish it. You will hear about the burning chapel, about the trial, about the choice your grandmother made that saved us all. He stood his joints cracking and walked to the door. Get some sleep, boy. The past is patient. It will wait until morning. Inside the house, Grace lit the lamps. The golden light spilled out onto the porch where Samuel sat turning the ring over and over in his hands, thinking about a grandmother he barely remembered and a strength he was only beginning to understand. The wind moved through the apple trees, 13 of them, tall and strong, their branches reaching toward the darkening sky. Beneath them, the graves lay quiet, but the story was not finished. Not yet. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the ranch house. Samuel had barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table, the gold ring on a chain around his neck, now tucked beneath his uniform shirt. Grace poured coffee, her movements efficient and familiar. Nathaniel came in from the porch, moving slowly the way old men move when the cold has settled in their bones overnight. But his eyes were clear. You ready for the rest? He asked Samuel. Yes, sir. It gets harder from here, Nate said. He sat down heavily in his chair. The journey to Denver, that is where your grandmother and I, that is where everything changed. Grace set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. Papa, maybe you should let the boy eat first. Let him hear it, Nate said. A man rides better with truth in his belly than food. He looked at Samuel. Your grandmother had never been more than 20 miles from that mission in 13 years. She knew prayers and planting and how to dig graves. She did not know the world. And I had forgotten how to be with another person. We were two broken things learning to fit together. He closed his eyes and the kitchen faded. The past rose up to swallow him whole. The first day on the trail was awkward. Abigail rode the gray gelding like a woman who had learned to ride but never loved it. She gripped the reins too tight. Her back was rigid. Every gust of wind made her flinch. Nate watched her from the corner of his eye. She wore the blue dress, but over it, she had pulled her old work coat as if she could not quite let go of the armor. The scarf around her head kept slipping. She would yank it back into place with jerky, frustrated movements. They stopped at midday to water the horses at a creek. The sky was gray and low, threatening more snow. The aspen leaves rattled dry as bone. You are holding the reins too tight, Nate said. The horse feels your fear. Abigail looked at him sharply. I am not afraid of the horse. Then what? She was quiet for a long moment. Then of not knowing what I am doing. I have always had rules, schedules, prayers. The hours were marked. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none. Vespers, compline. My whole life was structured. Now I am just making it up as I go. That is what freedom feels like, Nate said. It feels like drowning. That night they made camp in a stand of pine trees sheltered from the wind. Nate built a small fire, showed her how to set snares for rabbits. His hands guided hers, adjusting the loop, showing her where to place the stick trigger. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her, his fingers on her wrist, gentle but firm, positioning her hand. She did not flinch away. He noticed, filed it away. You ever camped like this before? He asked. Never. The mission was my world. I left it twice in 13 years. Once to help a neighboring ranch during a difficult birth. Once to redemption for Christmas Mass. You have been a prisoner, Nate said. A willing one, Abigail said. Prison was safer than what my uncle had planned for me. The rabbit snare was set. They sat by the fire as the light bled out of the sky. The temperature dropped fast. Nate pulled out a buffalo robe from his pack, spread it near the fire. We will have to share, he said. One blanket is not enough in cold like this. Abigail nodded. Her face was unreadable. They lay down on opposite sides of the robe, the fire between them and the stars. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. "Tell me about your wife," Abigail said suddenly. Nate was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. "Why?" he asked finally. "Because I have never heard a man speak of a woman with gentleness. I want to know it exists." Nate stared up at the stars. The Milky Way was a river of light overhead so bright it cast shadows. "Mary," he said. The name felt strange in his mouth after 5 years of not saying it. She was not beautiful by town standards. She had a gap between her front teeth, freckles everywhere. She laughed too loud. She could not cook worth a damn. He smiled at the memory. But when she looked at me, I felt seen. Really seen. Not the mountain man. Not the trapper. Just me. Nathan Bridger, the boy from Ohio who had run west because he did not fit anywhere else. What happened to her? Cholera. I was up running trap lines near the Absaroka Range. Gone 6 weeks. When I came back to camp, she and Thomas were already buried. The whole camp was empty. Folks had run afraid of the sickness. An old Crow woman had stayed long enough to bury them proper. Left a marker. That was it. His voice cracked. I did not even get to say goodbye. Abigail reached across the space between them. Her hand found his. She did not squeeze, did not offer platitudes, just held on. "I am sorry," she whispered. They lay like that, hands clasped, until sleep took them both. The second day started with rain. Cold, miserable rain that soaked through wool and leather and settled into the bones. They rode hunched against it, miserable and silent. At noon, Nate pulled up his horse. He held up a hand for quiet. Abigail stopped. "What is it?" "We are being followed." He had seen the tracks that morning. 3 horses unshod moving parallel to their trail. He had hoped they would veer off, but they had not. Who? Could be your uncle's men. Could be bounty hunters. Mountain men are not popular with the law. What do? We keep moving, stay alert. If they want trouble, they will come. The trouble came at a river crossing 2 hours later. The trail narrowed where it descended to a shallow ford. As they emerged from the trees, 3 men stepped out into the open. They were rough-looking. Hard men, the kind who hired out for dirty work and did not ask questions. The leader had a scarred face and was missing part of his left ear. "That is far enough," the scarred man called out. Nate reined in. His hand drifted toward the revolver on his hip, then stopped. 3 against 1 was bad odds. 3 against 2 with Abigail untrained was worse. "We have no quarrel with you," Nate said. His voice was calm, reasonable. "Maybe not, but Mr. Thorne has a quarrel with his niece. Says she needs to come home. Says she is not right in the head. We are here to escort her back, for her own safety." "I am not going anywhere," Abigail said. Her voice was steady, but Nate could hear the fear underneath. Scarface grinned. "See, talking back to her betters. Clear sign of a disturbed mind." The other 2 men spread out, flanking them. One of them was staring at Nate. "Say I know you," the man said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. A wanted poster. "Nathan Bridger, wanted for murder. $500 reward." Scarface's eyes lit up. "Is that right? Well then, this is our lucky day. We bring back the crazy nun and collect a bounty on a murderer. Mr. Thorne will be pleased." He started forward. "Now you can ride on out of here, Bridger, and we will just take the lady. Or we take you both. Your choice." Nate did not move. His mind was calculating distances, angles, the position of the sun, where the horses were. It was not enough. They were too spread out, too ready. Then Abigail moved. She spurred her horse forward directly at the man on the right. It was so unexpected, so sudden that the man stumbled backward. His hand went for his gun. Abigail kicked free of her stirrups and slid from the saddle while the horse was still moving. She hit the ground running. The man grabbed for her coat. She spun. Her fist, large and hard from 3 years of manual labor, caught him square on the jaw. His head snapped back. He staggered, but he did not go down. He lunged at her, grabbing her arms, forcing her back against a tree. His face was twisted with rage and something uglier. Lust. Cruelty. "Let us see if you are really a woman," he snarled. His hand went for the front of her dress. Something broke inside Abigail. It was not a decision. It was not a choice. It was a thing that lived below. Thought, below prayer, below all the civilized layers she had built over the core of herself. She brought her knee up hard into his groin. He gasped, bent forward. She grabbed his head with both hands and drove it down onto her rising knee. His nose shattered. Blood exploded across her dress. He fell. She looked around. There was a dead branch on the ground, thick as a man's wrist, gnarled and heavy. She picked it up. The man was trying to get up, blood streaming from his nose, one hand on the ground. Abigail swung the branch like an axe. It caught him across the temple. The sound was like a pumpkin dropped from a height. He collapsed. Abigail stood over him, chest heaving, the branch raised for another blow. Her eyes were wild, empty. She was somewhere else, some other time, some other fight. Abigail! Nate's voice cut through the haze. He is down, she blinked, looked at the branch in her hands, looked at the man bleeding in the dirt, looked at Nate, who had his gun drawn on the other two men who had frozen suddenly uncertain. Get on your horses and ride, Nate said quietly. Tell Thorne we are not coming back. Tell him if he sends more men, I will kill them. All of them. The two men grabbed their injured companion, hauled him onto his horse and fled. Nate turned to Abigail. She was shaking, violent tremors that made the branch rattle against the ground. Let it go, Nate said gently. She could not. Her fingers were locked around the wood. He stepped close, put his hands over hers. Slowly, gently pried them open. The branch fell. I wanted to kill him, she whispered. I wanted to. I saw his face and I saw all of them. The men at the mission, and I wanted. She looked at Nate with horrified eyes. What is wrong with me? Nothing, Nate said firmly. You did what you had to. No, she shook her head violently. You do not understand. At the mission when they came, I did not just defend. I hunted. I killed from behind. I hit them when they were not looking. It was not self-defense. It was slaughter. Her breathing was ragged. She was on the edge of breaking completely. How many? Nate asked. What? How many sisters did they kill before you stopped them? 6. And how many more would have died if you had not fought? 6 more. But that does not make it right. Mother Superior taught us to turn the other cheek, to forgive 70 times 7, to love our enemies. Your enemies killed 6 women while you were praying, Nate said. You stopped them. You saved 6 more. That is not sin. That is survival. The church says I should have died with them, that I should have accepted God's will. Then the church is wrong. The words hung into the cold air. Abigail stared at him. You cannot say that. I just did. They mounted up and rode hard for 3 hours, putting distance between themselves and Thorne's men. They found shelter as the sun was setting in an old trapper's cabin, half collapsed, but with enough roof to keep off the rain that had started again. Nate built a fire in the stone hearth. Smoke filled the small space before finding its way out through gaps in the roof. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, not speaking. Abigail's hands were still shaking. She could not make them stop. Tell me, Nate said finally. Tell me what happened. All of it. Why? Because you have been carrying it alone for 3 years, and it is killing you. Abigail looked at the fire. The flames danced and twisted, casting shadows that moved like living things. It was July, she said. Her voice was flat, distant, hot. We were in the chapel for none, the afternoon prayer. Sister Margaret was reading from the Psalms. I was in the back near the door. I was always in the back. She paused. Father Benedict heard them first. He stood up. It told us to stay calm. He went to the door. Her hands clenched. They shot him through the chest. The door was not even fully open. Just shot him. He fell back into the aisle. He looked at me, tried to say something. Blood came out of his mouth instead. Tears were running down her face now, but she did not seem to notice. They came in, 6 of them, drunk. They had been drinking in the canyon all day. We could smell it on them. Whiskey and sweat and hunger. Sister Margaret stepped forward. She said they could take whatever they wanted from the mission. Food, horses, just please do not hurt anyone. They laughed. The leader, he had a red beard. He said they had not come for food. Abigail's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They shot Sister Margaret next, then Sister Catherine when she tried to run. The others screamed. I did not scream. I just, I was very still, very quiet, like a rabbit when a fox walks by. They started grabbing the younger sisters, pulling them by their habits. Sister Anne, she was only 19, she was crying, begging. And I saw the axe. We kept it in the corner by the door for the woodpile. I picked it up. She looked at Nate. I did not pray. I did not ask God for guidance. I just picked it up and I swung it into the back of the nearest man's head. Her eyes were empty now, seeing it all again. He went down. The others turned. I hit another one before they knew what was happening. Caught him in the shoulder. He fell too. Then it was chaos. They were shouting, trying to get their guns up. But we were in close quarters. The chapel was crowded, and I was fast. I was so fast. Years of farm work, carrying water, lifting hay bales. I was stronger than they expected. I killed 4 more, some from the front, some from behind. It did not matter. I just kept swinging until there was no one left standing. She was rocking slightly now, arms wrapped around herself. The sisters who were alive, they ran, out the back, into the hills, and I stood there in the blood. My habit was soaked with it, my hands, my face. 2 of the men were still alive, wounded. One was begging, saying he was sorry, saying he had a family. I killed him anyway. The confession sat between them like a third presence. You think I am a monster? Abigail said. No, Nate said. I think you are alive when you should be dead. And I think that took more strength than most people have. The church says I sinned. The church was not there. Abigail looked up at him. How can you be so sure? Because 5 years ago, I let my wife and son die while I was chasing beaver pelts up a mountain. I was not there when they needed me. You were there. You did the thing that needed doing. Do not let anyone church or otherwise tell you that is sin. The storm hit that night. Not snow this time, but sleet driven horizontal by wind that howled through the gaps in the cabin walls. The temperature plummeted. They had one buffalo robe between them. Nate spread it near the fire. We have to share body heat, he said. Otherwise we freeze. Abigail nodded. She understood the math of survival. They lay down together facing the fire. Nate behind her, his body curled around hers, the buffalo robe pulled over them both. She could feel his breath on the back of her neck. His arm came around her waist, holding the robe in place. She went rigid. Easy, Nate murmured. I am not going to hurt you. I know, she whispered. That is not why I am afraid. Then why? Because I have never been held. Not like this. Not without violence behind it. She was shaking, but not from cold now. From something else. Something that felt like terror and need tangled together. You are safe, Nate said. I promise. You are safe. Just slowly over minutes that felt like hours, she relaxed. Her breathing deepened. The shaking stopped. This is what it feels like, she said so quietly he almost did not hear. To be human. I had forgotten. They lay like that through the night. When morning came pale and cold, they did not speak of it. But something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down. Denver was 3 days' hard ride from the mountain cabin. They arrived on a gray afternoon, the city spread out before them like a promise or a threat. Abigail had never seen so many buildings, so many people. The streets were crowded with wagons and horses and pedestrians. The noise was overwhelming. Church bells, dogs barking, vendors calling out their wares. Stay close, Nate said. They stabled their horses and walked through the streets toward the cathedral district. Abigail kept her head down, but she could feel eyes on her. A tall woman in a blue dress and work coat walking beside a mountain man in buckskins. They looked out of place. Dangerous. The archdiocesan office was a Gothic building, all dark stone and narrow windows. It loomed over the street like a judgment. They climbed the steps. Nate opened the heavy oak door. Inside, the air smelled of incense and old paper and power. A young priest sat at a desk in the antechamber. He looked up, his expression curdling when he saw them. Yes. I am here to see Bishop Caro, Abigail said. Her voice was steady. About Mission San Rafael. The priest looked her up and down. The bishop does not see women of uncertain status. I am Sister Abigail Thorne. I served at the mission for 13 years. You were Sister Abigail Thorne, the priest corrected. His Excellency made clear you are no longer recognized as a member of the order. You abandoned your post. I stayed with the dead when the church fled, Abigail said. Her voice was hardening now, anger creeping in. Now tell the bishop I am here. That will not be possible. He is in conference. Abigail took a step forward. The priest actually flinched. Then I will wait. In his office. Go tell him. Something in her eyes, some echo of the woman who had killed 6 men with an axe, made the priest stand up quickly and disappear through a side door. They waited. Nate stood beside her, solid and watchful. The door opened. A man entered, and the room seemed to shrink around him. Bishop William Caro was in his 60s, corpulent with rings on his fingers that caught the light. He wore fine robes, purple and gold. His face was soft, well-fed, but his eyes were hard. Sister Abigail, he said. The title was laced with contempt. Or should I say, Miss Thorne, you look diminished. Your Excellency. Abigail did not bow, did not genuflect, just stood there. I understand you are here about the unfortunate business of the mission sale. Unfortunate business, Abigail repeated. Her voice was tight. Is that what you call it? The mission was no longer viable after the tragedy. The church made a difficult but necessary decision. My sisters died there. It is consecrated ground. You cannot sell it. The church can dispose of property as it sees fit, the bishop said smoothly. Your uncle made a generous offer during a time of financial difficulty. The transaction is recorded and legal. Show me, Nate said. His voice cut through the room like a blade. The bishop turned, noticing him for the first time. And who might you be? A friend. Show us the bill of sale. The bishop's lip curled, but he walked to his desk and retrieved a leather folder. He opened it and removed a document, laid it on the desk. Nate and Abigail stepped forward. The paper was heavy parchment covered in dense legal script. At the bottom was a signature, Mother Mary Catherine Brennan, Mother Superior of Mission San Rafael, and the date, March 1872. Abigail felt the floor tilt under her feet. March 1872, she whispered. That is 6 months before the tragedy, yes, the bishop said. The transaction was completed well in advance. That is impossible. Mother Superior never said anything about selling. She would have told us. She would have. Nate was leaning over the document, his eyes narrowed. He had learned to read surveys and contracts in his years as a trapper. You had to, or you got cheated. This signature is forged, he said. The bishop stiffened. Excuse me? I said it is forged. The slant is wrong. The pressure is uneven. And look here, he pointed at the signature. The M in Mary, it slopes backward. That is not a natural way to write. That is someone copying a signature they are looking at. How dare you, the bishop said. His face was flushing red. You stand in the house of and accuse the church of fraud. I am accusing you of fraud, Nate said. You sold that mission before the women who lived there were dead. You pulled the army escort. You left them defenseless. And you did it so Silas Thorne could dig his silver mine. You have no proof of such slander. I have this, Nate said, tapping the document. And any decent surveyor will confirm the signature is false. Abigail was staring at the bishop. The pieces were falling into place in her mind. The sudden withdrawal of the army patrol, the supply shipments that stopped coming, the feeling in those last months that they had been forgotten. They had not been forgotten. They had been sacrificed. You killed them, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You killed my sisters for silver. I killed no one, the bishop said. I made a difficult administrative decision in the best interests of the church. You sold us, I sold land. What happened after was unfortunate, but not the church's responsibility. The frontier is a dangerous place. Everyone knows that. Abigail lunged. She did not plan it, did not think. She just moved her hands, reaching for the bishop's throat. Nate caught her, held her back. She struggled against him, but he was strong enough to hold her. You left us to die, Abigail was shouting now, tears streaming down her face. Sister Margaret was 23 years old. Sister Anne was 19. They were children, and you sold them for money. The bishop rang a bell on his desk. Two large men appeared, guards in uniform. Escort these people out, immediately. This is not over, Nate said. Oh, but it is, the bishop said. His composure had returned. He looked at Abigail with cold satisfaction. You have just proven, Miss Thorne, that you are indeed mentally unstable. You attacked a bishop of the church. I will be writing to the territorial judge about this incident. It will support your uncle's petition for guardianship quite nicely. The guards grabbed them. Abigail was still struggling, still shouting. I was a nun, I served Dome, and you sold me. You sold all of us. As they dragged her toward the door, she reached up and grabbed the scapular around her neck, the small piece of cloth that marked her as a religious. She tore it off, threw it at the bishop's feet. I renounce my vows, she screamed, not because I do not believe in God, but because I do not believe in you. The church is a lie, you are a lie, and I will not die for your corruption. The bishop smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. Then you are damned, Miss Thorne, and your testimony is worthless. The word of an apostate means nothing in a territorial court. Good day. They threw them out onto the street. Abigail stood in the dirt chest, heaving tears streaking through the dust on her face. Nate put a hand on her shoulder. It is all right, he said. No, Abigail said. It is not. He was right. I am damned now. I broke my vows. I attacked a bishop. No court will believe me. No one will help us. Then we help ourselves. How, but Nate did not have an answer. They walked through the streets of Denver as the sun set, two lost people in a city that did not care whether they lived or died. They spent that night in a cheap boarding house on the edge of the city, paid for a single room because it was all they could afford. There was one narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked out onto an alley. Nate sat on the floor, his back against the wall. Abigail sat on the bed, her face in her hands. I am sorry, she said finally. For what? For dragging you into this. You could have left. You could have ridden away days ago. I could have, Nate agreed, but I did not want to. She looked up at him. Why? Because you are the first person in 5 years who has made me feel like I am still alive. Still here. Everyone else looks at me like I am a ghost. You look at me like I am real. You are real, Abigail said. So are you, and we will find a way through this. There was a long silence. Then Abigail spoke. I am scared. Of Silas. Of this. She gestured between them. Of what I am feeling. I do not know how to. I have spent 13 years being told that any desire, any want, any need for another person is sin. And now I want... She stopped, could not finish. Nate stood up. He crossed the small room and knelt in front of her. What do you want? He asked gently. To not be alone anymore, she whispered. To be seen. To be chosen. You are chosen, Nate said. I choose you, Abigail. Right now, not the nun, not the survivor. Just you, the woman sitting in front of me. She reached out. Her hand touched his face, traced the line of his jaw, rough with beard. I do not know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. We learn together. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not practiced or smooth. It was desperate and hungry and full of 3 years of isolation and 13 years of denial. Nate kissed her back. His hands went to her waist, pulled her closer. They broke apart, both breathing hard. I have never, Abigail said. I know. Will you show me? Yes, Nate said, but not tonight. You are exhausted. You are hurt. And I will not have you regret this in the morning. Abigail looked at him with something like wonder. You would wait as long as you need. She lay down on the bed fully clothed. Nate lay beside her on top of the covers. She reached out and took his hand. Stay, she said. I am not going anywhere. They slept like that, hands joined as Denver breathed and moved around them in the darkness. They left Denver at dawn. There was nothing more to be done there. The church would not help them. The courts would not listen to an apostate and a wanted man. They rode north back toward the mountains, back toward the mission. They did not speak much, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of things, unsaid things waiting. On the second night, camped high in a pine forest, Nate noticed her staring at a wanted poster he had torn down from a post along the trail. You want to know about it, he said. It was not a question. Abigail nodded. Nate poked at the fire with a stick. Sparks rose up into the night. Thomas Wickham, whiskey trader, sold to the Crow tribe near where I was trapping. My wife Mary got a bottle from him, traded for it with a quilt she had made. She did not know it was poisoned. Methanol, wood alcohol, mixed with cheap whiskey to stretch it further. His voice was flat, factual. She drank it, shared it with 2 Crow families she was friendly with. By the time I came down from the mountains, 6 people were dead, including Mary and Thomas. My son, he was 7 years old. Abigail made a small sound, pain and sympathy. I tracked Wickham, took me 2 months, found him at a trading post in Wyoming. I confronted him, told him he needed to answer for murder. He laughed, said Indians were not people, said you could not murder what was not human. Nate's hands clenched. I lost control. I beat him. He pulled a knife. We fought. I killed him with my bare hands, choked him until he stopped moving. It was self-defense, Abigail said. It was rage, Nate corrected. Pure rage. And his brother is a territorial judge. Issued a warrant. Said I murdered Thomas in cold blood for his goods. Said I was a savage and a criminal. So you ran. So I ran, been running for 5 years. Abigail was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved around the fire and sat beside him. We are the same, she said. Both punished for surviving. Both carrying guilt for things we could not control. The church says you are damned for breaking vows. The law says I am damned for seeking justice. Then let us be damned together, Abigail said. She kissed him. This time there was no hesitation, no questions, just need. Nate pulled back slightly. Are you sure? I am sure I do not want to die never having chosen something for myself. I am sure I do not want to go back to that mission, never having known what it feels like to be wanted. You are wanted, Nate said. His voice was rough. God help me, Abigail, you are wanted. What happened next happened slowly. There was fumbling, uncertainty, moments of awkwardness that would have been funny if they were not so sacred. Nate was gentle, patient. When she froze, afraid he stopped, waited, let her decide. Keep going, she whispered. Please, do not stop. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the stars. Abigail was crying, but not from pain or regret, from relief, from the sudden, overwhelming realization that her body was her own. That pleasure was not sin. That being held was not a prelude to violence. I did not know, she said. I did not know it could be like this. Neither did I, Nate said. Not like this, not with someone who understands. They slept wrapped around each other, the fire burning down to embers, the stars wheeling overhead. The third day they saw the smoke. They were 20 miles from the mission, descending through a narrow canyon when Nate reined in his horse. What is it? Abigail asked. He pointed. On the horizon, a dark smudge against the blue sky. Smoke. Too much smoke for a cooking fire. They spurred their horses forward, pushing hard, the animals straining. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the Mission Valley, they saw it. The mission was surrounded. Men and horses filled the yard. And the chapel, the old stone chapel where Abigail had buried her sisters, was burning. Flames roared from the windows. The roof was starting to collapse. But that was not the worst of it. The graves. The 13 graves, they had been dug up. The wooden crosses lay broken in the dirt. The coffins had been opened and emptied. Abigail made a sound like a wounded animal. He is destroying the evidence, Nate said. The deed. It was kept in the chapel. He is burning everything. We have to stop him. We are 2 people. There are 10 men down there, maybe more. I do not care. Then from behind them a voice spoke. Then you need more than courage. You need truth. They spun. An old woman sat on a mule not 10 yards away. She had appeared without sound. She was Ute ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as obsidian. Maria, Abigail breathed. Child, the old woman said, I have been waiting 3 days, watching, knowing you would come back. How did you? Dreams, Maria said simply. They told me you would fight, that you would need witness. So I come. She held up something, a small metal disc on a leather thong, a medallion. I kept this from one of the dead men, 3 years, knew one day it would matter. She handed it to Nate. He turned it over. Stamped into the metal was a mark. The letters ST intertwined. Silas Thorne's company seal. This changes everything, Nate said. Yes, Maria agreed. But first you must fight. Are you ready? Abigail looked down at the mission, at the flames consuming the chapel, at the men who had desecrated her sister's graves. I am ready, she said. Samuel stood up from the kitchen table so fast his chair fell over. What happened next? He demanded. Did you fight them? Did Maria testify? Nate smiled. It was a tired smile, an old smile. Tomorrow, he said, before you ride out, I will tell you about the burning chapel, about the trial in the mud, about how your grandmother stood in front of the whole town and chose herself over everything the world told her she should be. But Grandpa, tomorrow, Nate said firmly, a story told right needs time to breathe, and you need to sleep. You have a long ride to Montana. Samuel nodded reluctantly, but as he headed to his room, he turned back. Grandpa, the ring, Grandma's ring, you said it was made from her crucifix. Yes. That means she chose you over God. No, Nate said softly. She chose herself, and in doing that, she found both me and God in the right order. Samuel lay in bed that night, the ring around his neck feeling its weight. Outside, the wind moved through the apple trees. 13 of them planted over 13 graves, their branches heavy with fruit in the darkness. And tomorrow he would hear how the story ended. How two broken people fought an entire town and won. How a nun became a woman. How a fugitive became a husband. How a mission became a home. But tonight he dreamed of smoke and fire and an old woman on a mule holding truth in her weathered hands. The morning Samuel was to leave for Montana came too soon. He sat at the breakfast table, his pack already by the door, his horse saddled and waiting. But he could not leave. Not yet. Not without knowing how it ended. Nathaniel came in from the barn, moving slowly in the way old men do when their bodies remember every hard year. He poured coffee, sat down across from his grandson. You still here? I need to hear the rest, Grandpa. I need to know what happened. Grace brought biscuits and gravy, set them down without a word. She had heard this story before, many times, but she sat down too. Some stories bear repeating. Nate looked out the window at the apple trees, their branches heavy with late September fruit. 13 trees perfectly spaced, marking 13 graves that had been empty now for 50 years. Where was I, he asked. Maria. She had the medallion. You were about to fight. Nate nodded slowly. Yes, the fight. That is where your grandmother became something the world had no name for. Not a nun, not a widow, not a victim. Something new. He closed his eyes. The kitchen faded. The past rose up vivid as yesterday. Maria Reyes sat on her ancient mule, holding the medallion up so it caught the afternoon light. The metal disc spun slowly, the initials ST clearly visible even from a distance. This proves nothing by itself, Nate said. One medallion. They will say you stole it, say you are lying. Then we make them see the truth another way, Maria said. Her voice was like wind through dry grass, old but strong. The town, they come to watch. They always come to watch burning. We give them something to witness. Abigail was staring down at the mission. Smoke poured from the chapel windows. Men moved through the yard like ants, purposeful and destructive. How many, she asked. 10, maybe 12, Nate said. Plus the sheriff, and I see another carriage. Someone important. Bishop, Maria said. She spat on the ground. He comes to watch his work finish. Abigail felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Not fear, something else. Something that felt like rage refined into clarity. Then we go down, she said, and we finish it. They descended the ridge slowly. Maria went first on her mule, an old woman on a harmless animal. Nate and Abigail followed at a distance, staying in the tree line until they were close. By the time they emerged into the open, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread through redemption. Come see the crazy nun's mission burn. Come see justice done. People lined the road, sitting on wagons, standing in clusters. Men, women, children. An audience for destruction. Abigail rode into the yard, head high, shoulders back. No scarf now. Her short, scarred scalp was bare for all to see. She wore the blue dress torn and stained from travel. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had ridden through hell and was not done fighting. The crowd fell silent. Sheriff Hoskins stepped forward. He was a good man caught in a bad situation. His face showed it. Miss Thorne, he said, you should not be here. For your own safety, I have to ask you to leave. This is my land, Abigail said. Her voice carried across the yard. Loud, clear, unafraid. I am not leaving. Silas Thorne emerged from the mission house. He wore an expensive suit despite the dust and smoke. His face was flushed triumphant. Behind him came Bishop Caro, his purple robes incongruous against the rough frontier buildings. Niece, Silas called out. His voice was smooth, playing to the crowd. Thank God you are safe. We feared you had been taken by force. By this criminal. He pointed at Nate. Murmurs ran through the crowd. He took nothing, Abigail said. He gave me the only thing no one else would, choice. You see, Silas addressed the crowd, now a preacher to his congregation. She is clearly not in her right mind, confused, traumatized by the terrible events that occurred here. She needs help, medical help, the kind only a hospital for the disturbed can provide. The crowd shifted, some nodding, some uncertain. Bishop Caro stepped forward. My child, he said, his voice oily with false concern. You broke your sacred vows. You attacked a bishop of the church. You abandoned your calling. You are no longer fit to speak on matters of property or faith. I am not your child, Abigail said. Each word was a hammer blow, and I did not abandon my calling. You sold it for silver. Gasps rippled through the watchers. You sold this mission 6 months before my sisters died. You pulled the army escort. You left us defenseless. And when we were murdered, you covered it up with lies and paperwork. Slander, the bishop sputtered. This woman is deranged. Then explain this. Maria Reyes rode forward on her mule. She held up the medallion, turning it so the crowd could see. I took this from dead man, 3 years ago, man who killed the sisters. She rode closer to the sheriff, handed him the disc. Sheriff Hoskins examined it. His face went pale. This is registered to Thorne Mining Company, he said quietly. It is a forgery, Silas shouted. That savage witch. I am witch who delivered half your children, Maria said, her voice cutting through his bluster. Witch who cured fever that killed 5 families 10 years past. Witch who speak truth now. You sent those men. They killed the sisters. She survived. She pointed at Abigail. I was there day before, trading herbs. I saw 4 men camping near Mission. White men. I heard them talking. They say boss wants it clear by weekend. Silver SA good. We rich. One man wore this. She touched the medallion in the sheriff's hand. This proves nothing, Silas said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. The testimony of an Indian is sworn testimony, the sheriff said. He was looking at Silas now with new eyes, calculating eyes. And this medallion is evidence. Evidence that places your men at the scene of a massacre. The crowd was no longer murmuring approval of Silas. They were murmuring questions. Doubt. Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, the preacher's wife, who had spat at Abigail's feet in town, spoke up. But she killed men with an axe that is not Christian. Abigail turned to face her. The crowd. All of them. No, she said. It is not Christian. It is human. 6 men came to murder us. I killed them. If that is sin, then I will burn in hell for it. But I will not apologize for refusing to die. She looked around at the faces, some hostile, some uncertain, some a few showing something like understanding. You want to call me a monster, fine. I am a monster, but I am the monster your world made when it told me that being strong was unfeminine, that fighting back was unholy, that survival was shame. Her voice was rising now, years of suppressed rage finding its outlet. I buried 13 people by myself. I dug 13 graves in rocky ground in July heat. I washed their bodies. I said prayers over them because no priest would come. I have lived here alone for 3 years, keeping their memory alive, keeping this place standing. And you, she swept her hand across the crowd. You called me devil. You called me cursed. You spat at me. And now my uncle wants to dig up their bones for silver, wants to make me disappear into an asylum. Wants to take the only thing I have left. She was crying now, but her voice did not break. So yes, I am a monster, because monsters are the only things that survive in this world. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Silas broke it. "Enough!" he screamed. Burn it all! I am done with this!" He grabbed a torch from one of his men and hurled it through the chapel window. The flames inside roared higher. The roof timbers cracked. "The deed?" Abigail shouted. "The original deed. It is in the sacristy." She spurred her horse forward. "No!" Nate yelled, but she was already moving. Abigail dismounted at the run. She hit the chapel door with her shoulder. The old wood splintered. Heat blasted out a wall of fire that singed her hair, her eyebrows. Inside was an inferno. The pews were burning, the altar was engulfed. Smoke churned black and choking. She could not see, could not breathe. She dropped to her knees, crawling under the worst of the smoke. She knew this building, had cleaned it 1,000 times, knew every stone. The sacristy was to the left. Stone walls might still be intact. She found the door, kicked it open. Inside, the stone had protected the space from the worst of the flames. A wooden cabinet stood against the wall. She tore it open. Papers scattered. She grabbed at them, searching. There, a metal box, locked. She grabbed it, turned to leave. A beam fell from the ceiling, massive, burning. It came down directly in her path. Then Nate was there. He must have followed her in. He grabbed her, shoved her aside, took the impact of the beam across his shoulder and back. He went down hard pinned. "Go," he gasped. "Get out." Abigail looked at him. At the beam. It was too heavy, impossibly heavy. She set down the box, grabbed the beam with both hands. Every muscle in her body screamed. She was strong, stronger than most men, but this was beyond strength. This was physics and fire and death. She lifted anyway. Something inside her body gave, a tearing sensation in her back, but the beam moved, inches, enough. "Buffalo!" she screamed. Nate rolled out from under the beam. She dropped it, grabbed him, grabbed the box, dragged them both toward the door as the roof collapsed behind them with a roar like the end of the world. They burst out of the chapel, coughing, smoking alive. The crowd had gone silent again. They had just watched a woman lift a beam that should have been impossible to lift. Watched her drag a 200-pound man out of a burning building. Watched a monster perform a miracle. Abigail knelt in the dirt, the metal box clutched to her chest. Nate lay beside her, groaning, his shirt burned through his shoulder, blistered and bleeding. Sheriff Hoskins ran forward. "Let me see that." Abigail handed him the box. He took a rock, smashed the lock, opened it. Inside, a single document, yellowed with age. Heavy parchment. The sheriff read it. His lips moved silently. Then he looked up at Silas. "This is the original land grant, signed by Territorial Governor Evans in 1860. It says, and I quote, 'Granted in perpetuity to Mission San Rafael and its heirs.'" He looked at Abigail. "You are the last heir, the last surviving member of the mission. By law, this land is yours." Silas went white. "That is, you cannot—" "I can," the sheriff said. "We can. And I am. Mr. Thorne, you are under arrest for fraud, for conspiracy to commit murder, and for desecration of graves. You cannot prove any of that. I have testimony from Mrs. Reyes. I have physical evidence." He held up the medallion. "And I have a forged bill of sale that you filed with the county, but never with the territorial recorder. That is fraud under territorial law." He gestured to his deputies. "Take him." Silas Corner did something desperate and stupid. He pulled a pistol from his coat. "You ruined me," he screamed at Abigail. "You were supposed to be nothing. Nothing. I should have sold you to Blackwood when I had the chance. Should have let you die in this godforsaken place." He raised the gun, aimed at Abigail. Nate, burned and hurt, threw himself between them. The gun went off. The bullet caught Nate in the side, just above the hip. He grunted, went down to one knee. Abigail moved. She crossed the space between herself and Silas in 3 strides. He tried to turn the gun on her. She grabbed his wrist, twisted. The gun fell. She hit him. Not with a fist. With an open palm, driven with all the strength of her shoulders, all the fury of 3 years of grief and rage. Silas flew backward, hit the ground hard, did not get up. Abigail stood over him. The crowd watched, holding its breath. She could kill him. They all knew it. She was strong enough. He deserved it. She reached down. Her hand went around his throat. "Abigail." Nate's voice, weak but steady. You are not that person anymore. Her hand tightened. She could feel Silas's pulse under her fingers. Fast, terrified. She thought of Sister Margaret, of Sister Catherine, of the 12 graves she had dug by herself. She thought of the woman she had been, the woman she was trying to become. She let go. I survived you, she said, looking down at Silas. That is my victory. She stood up, turned away, let the sheriff's men take him. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some silent, some still hostile. But the power had shifted. Bishop Caro tried to slip away in the chaos, but the sheriff called out, Your Excellency, I need you to remain as well. There are questions about your role in the fraudulent sale. The bishop went rigid. You cannot arrest a bishop. I can detain a witness, and if you flee, I will issue a warrant. The bishop looked around, saw no allies, no escape. He stepped into his carriage, his face purple with rage and humiliation. Then from the road a new voice called out, Hold there! A man on horseback rode into the yard. He wore a federal marshal's star on his coat. He was in his 50s, weathered with hard eyes. He looked directly at Nate. Nathan Bridger. Nate, bleeding from the gunshot, looked up. Yes, you are wanted for the murder of Thomas Wickham. I am placing you under arrest. Abigail stepped in front of him. No, he killed in self-defense. That is for a judge to decide, ma'am. Now step aside. I will not. The marshal's hand went to his gun. The crowd tensed. This was about to get ugly. Then Maria Reyes spoke. I witnessed that killing. The marshal turned. You what? I was there, Fort Laramie, trading post. 5 years ago, I saw Thomas Wickham sell bad whiskey to soldiers. Saw this man, she pointed at Nate, confront him. Wickham draw knife first. This man defend himself. You are Indian. Your testimony is sworn, Maria said firmly. She reached into a leather pouch at her belt and pulled out a folded paper so old it was nearly falling apart. 3 soldiers saw. They write it down, sign it. I keep it. Waiting. The marshal took the paper, read it. His face changed. This is signed by Sergeant William Hatch, Private John Morrison, and Corporal Samuel Bent. All 3 are deceased now, but this is an official statement witnessed and dated. He looked at Nate. Judge Wickham, the man who issued your warrant, died last year. Heart failure. Without him pushing the case and with this evidence, he tore the wanted poster in half. You are free, Bridger. Case closed. Nate stared at him, then at Maria. Why did you keep that? Because someday justice would matter, Maria said simply. Today is that day. The marshal tipped his hat and rode away. The crowd began to disperse. Slowly, reluctantly. The show was over. Sheriff Hoskins approached Abigail. Miss Thorne, the land is yours, legally. No question. But the bishop will likely appeal, and there will be talk. Let them talk, Abigail said. I am done being afraid of talk. Mrs. Whitmore, the preacher's wife, stepped forward. Her face was conflicted, shame and pride warring. Miss Thorne, she said stiffly, the land is yours. The law says so. It was not an apology. It was not friendship, but it was acknowledgement. Abigail nodded. Thank you. Nate was trying to stand. Abigail went to him, helped him up. The gunshot wound was bleeding but not fatal. The bullet had gone through the fatty tissue above his hip. Painful but survivable. We need to get you to a doctor, she said. We need to get off this cursed ground, Nate said. I have had enough of this place for one day. They walked to their horses. Maria followed. You come to my camp, Maria said. I have herbs. I fix him proper. They rode away from the mission, from the burning chapel, from the graves and the memories as the sun set over the mountains, painting everything gold. 6 months later, spring of 1874, the chapel was gone, demolished down to the foundation stones. In its place, a cabin, sturdy, well-built, with a real glass window and a stone fireplace. Nate and Abigail built it together, log by log, stone by stone. The mission was gone. What stood in its place was a homestead, a ranch. Abigail wore simple dresses now. Her hair had grown to shoulder length, still uneven, still marked by scars, but no longer brutal. She looked different, softer somehow, but no less strong. Nate moved with a permanent hitch in his gait, a gift from the burning beam and the bullet wound. But he was putting on weight. The haunted look was gone from his eyes. Spring brought work, fences to mend, cattle to tend, a garden to plant, and it brought visitors. Mrs. Whitmore came bringing a basket of preserves, an offering, an olive branch. I judged you wrongly, she said. The words came hard. I am sorry. Abigail took the preserves. Thank you. It was a start. The sheriff visited, offered Nate a job as a deputy, someone to track rustlers in the high country. I know those mountains, Hoskins said, and I need a man who can handle himself. Pay is not much, but it is regular. Nate took the job. Maria brought her granddaughter, Little Sparrow, 10 years old, quiet and watchful. She needs learning, Maria said. Reading, English. You teach. I am not a teacher, Abigail protested. You are now. So Little Sparrow came 3 days a week, learned letters, numbers, stories. The cycle was breaking, rescue becoming legacy. On a warm day in late April, Nate and Abigail planted apple trees, 13 of them, one for each grave. They planted them in a line along the northern fence, young saplings. They would take years to bear fruit, but they would grow, would spread their branches wide, would bloom white and pink every spring. As they worked, Abigail spoke to the graves. I do not know if you forgive me for leaving the veil, but I hope you understand I am not abandoning you. I am living the life you did not get to live. Nate straightened, wiping dirt from his hands. You think they approved what Mother Superior's last words were, God has a purpose for you. Maybe this is it, not prayer and penance, just life. They stood looking at the young trees, fragile and hopeful against the vast squinting. Will you marry me? Nate asked. Abigail turned. What? Will you marry me proper, with witnesses? I know the church will not recognize it, but I do not care about the church. I care about you. Abigail was quiet for a long moment. Then, yes. They married in June under the apple trees that had just begun to leaf out. Father Patrick officiated, a young priest new to the territory sent to replace Bishop Caro, who had been quietly transferred to a distant parish in the east. Father Patrick was different, reform-minded. He wore simple robes, spoke plainly. The church may not recognize this union officially, he said, but I believe God does. I believe God sees two souls who chose each other honestly, without pretense, without fear, and that is holier than any ceremony. Abigail wore a dress Grace would later inherit, blue cotton with small white flowers, the same dress she had worn leaving the mission. Nate wore a new shirt, clean and pressed. His hair was cut, his beard trimmed. The congregation was small. Maria and Little Sparrow, Sheriff Hoskins and his wife, 3 neighboring ranchers and their families, Mrs. Whitmore and her husband sitting in the back, uncertain but present. The vows were simple. Nate spoke first. I vow to see you every day, in full, for exactly who you are. Abigail's turn, her voice steady, strong. I vow to let you and to see you back, to choose you every day until I die. The rings were simple gold bands melted down from Abigail's old crucifix, the one she had torn off in the bishop's office, reforged into something new. When Father Patrick said, you may kiss your bride, Nate leaned in and kissed her gently, thoroughly, without shame or hesitation. The small crowd clapped. They held a dinner afterward, beef and potatoes, bread and butter, apple pie from dried apples saved from last fall. It was not grand, it was not formal, but it was real. As the sun set and people began to leave, Maria pulled Abigail aside. You happy? Abigail thought about it. Yes, I think I am. Good, Maria said. You deserve happy. You fought for it. Now you keep it. No. 1 year later, summer of 1875. Abigail was 7 months pregnant. She moved through the garden with the careful balance of a woman carrying extra weight. Her back ached, her ankles swelled. She had never been more uncomfortable or more content. Nate brought water, watched her with worried eyes. You should rest. I have rested enough for one lifetime, Abigail said. But she sat down on the bench he had built, rubbed her swollen belly. The baby kicked. Strong kicks, demanding kicks. This one is going to be trouble, she said. Like the mother, Nate said, grinning. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the squantumine. The cattle grazed in the distance. The apple trees, now waist-high, rustled in the breeze. "Do you miss it?" Nate asked. "The mission, the sisterhood." Abigail thought about it, really thought. "I miss them. The women, the routine, the certainty. But I do not miss the cage. I do not miss being told what to want, what to be." She looked at Nate. "I chose this. Every day I choose this. And that makes all the difference." The baby kicked again, harder. "What will we tell this child?" Nate asked. "About how we met," Abigail smiled. "We will tell the truth, that sometimes salvation looks like a stranger in a storm, and sometimes freedom looks like letting go of what you thought God wanted and choosing what your heart knows is right. And if the child asks if you are still a nun, I will say no, I am something better. I am a woman who chose her own vows and kept them." Samuel stood on the porch, his pack by his feet, his horse saddled and waiting. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the mountains pink and gold. Nathaniel stood beside him, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. Grace was inside, making breakfast that Samuel would not eat because his stomach was too tight with nerves and anticipation. "So that is it?" Samuel asked. "You and Grandma, you got married, had children, lived here?" "That is it," Nate said. "We had 3 children. Grace, your mother. Thomas, named after my son I lost. He died in France during the Great War. And Sarah, named after my wife Mary. She became a lawyer, lives in Denver, fights for women who have no voice, just like her mother." "How long were you married?" 41 years. She died in 19 from heart failure. She was 72, lived longer than anyone expected given how hard she worked. Nate's voice was steady, but Samuel saw the glint of tears in the old man's eyes. "Do you miss her?" "Every day, every single day. But I do not regret a moment. Not the fear, not the running, not the fighting, because it led to her, to you, to all of this." He gestured at the ranch, at the apple trees, now massive, their branches spreading wide, heavy with fruit. "Those trees, Samuel, your grandmother planted them when she was 33 years old. She watered them, pruned them, talked to them like they were children. She died under them, asked me to bury her there with her sisters. So I did." Samuel looked at the trees with new eyes. "She is under there right now. She is, her and me when my time comes, together, the way it should be." Grace came out onto the porch. She held something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Samuel. He unwrapped it. Inside was a book, leather-bound, handwritten pages. "What is this?" "Your grandmother's journal," Grace said. "She started writing it after you were born. She wanted you to know her story, all of it, in her own words." Samuel opened it. The first page in neat, precise handwriting. "To my grandson Samuel, you are named after the prophet who heard God's voice and answered, 'Here I am.' May you always have the courage to answer when you are called. This is my story, the story of how I learned to answer." Samuel closed the book carefully, tucked it into his pack. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough. Nate pulled something from his pocket. The gold ring, Abigail's ring. This was made from her crucifix, the one she wore as a nun. She melted it down and made it into something new, something chosen. When you are scared, when you doubt, you look at this ring and remember, you come from people who refuse to break. Samuel took the ring. It was warm from Nate's hand. He put it on a chain, hung it around his neck, tucked it under his uniform. "I will make you proud, Grandpa." "You already have. Now go. Montana is waiting." And Samuel, "Yes, sir. You do not have to be strong all the time. You just have to be honest, with yourself and with others. Your grandmother taught me that. Strength without honesty is just violence. But honesty, even when you are afraid, that is courage." Samuel hugged his grandfather. The old man was frail now, all bone and papery skin, but his arms were still strong. "Come back and visit," Grace said. "I will, I promise." Samuel mounted his horse, looked back one last time at the ranch, at the cabin, at the apple trees, at the only home he had ever known. Then he turned his horse north and rode away. Nate and Grace stood on the porch watching until he disappeared over the ridge. "You think he will be all right?" Grace asked. "He is your mother's grandson," Nate said. "He will be plenty." They went inside, but Nate paused at the door, looked back at the apple trees one more time. "I lived well, Abigail," he whispered. "We lived well." Samuel never returned to live on the ranch. He became one of Montana's finest rangers, protected the forests, fought fires, saved lives. He married a woman named Catherine. They had 4 children. He wrote home every month, long letters full of details about his life, his work, his growing family, and he always signed the same way, "From the one who never broke." Because that was the legacy, not the land, not the apple trees, not even the story. The legacy was choice. The legacy was the understanding that strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is doing what is right even when you are terrified. The legacy was knowing that sometimes the life you are supposed to live is not the one anyone else planned for you. Nathaniel Bridger died in the winter of 1925. He was 86 years old. He died in his sleep in the cabin he had built with Abigail, under the roof they had raised together. Grace buried him under the apple trees, next to Abigail, just as he had asked. She planted one more tree, the 14th tree, for him. The ranch stayed in the family, passed from mother to daughter, just as Abigail had wanted. The women held it, protected it, grew it. During the Depression, when other ranches failed, the Bridger Ranch survived, because the women who ran it knew how to endure, how to work, how to choose survival over pride. During the war, when men were scarce, the women ran cattle drives, fixed fences, broke horses, did the work that needed doing. The apple trees grew tall. Every fall, they produced fruit, apples that were sweet and crisp and perfect for pie. And every generation told the story of the nun who became a warrior, of the mountain man who became a husband, of the choice that changed everything. 100 years after Abigail first picked up an axe in that chapel, the trees still stand. They are ancient now, gnarled, but still producing fruit. The mission is long gone. Even the foundation stones have been scattered and repurposed. But the ranch remains, smaller now. The family moved away, scattered across the country, pursuing their own dreams. But one descendant comes back every autumn, a great-great-granddaughter named Abigail, named after the woman who started it all. She comes to harvest the apples, to walk among the graves that have not held bodies for a century but still hold memory. She brings her own children, tells them the story, shows them the journal carefully preserved, the pages yellowed but the words still clear. Your great-great-great-grandmother was a nun who fought off 6 killers with an axe. She buried 13 people by herself. She stood up to a whole town and won. She chose freedom over fear. And because of her, you are here. The children listen wide-eyed. Was she really that strong, the youngest asks. She was stronger, young Abigail says, because real strength is not just muscle. It is choosing to keep going when everything tells you to quit. It is choosing to build when it would be easier to burn. It is choosing love when hate is all you have known. They walk to the trees. The children touch the rough bark, feel the weight of the branches heavy with fruit. And somewhere in the way the wind moves through the leaves, in the way the light falls across the old graves, there is a sense of presence. Not haunting, not sorrow, just the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, of choices well made, of love that did not die when the lovers did, but instead took root and grew into something that fed generations. The children pick apples, fill their baskets, their laughter echoes across the valley. And the mountains watch as they always have, silent witnesses to the small, fierce miracle of human courage, to the truth that sometimes the greatest act of faith is not prayer. It is choosing yourself, choosing honestly, choosing love, and refusing no matter what the world says to break. The story ends where it began, with choice, with freedom, with a woman and a man who looked at the life the world demanded they live and said simply, clearly, without apology, no, I choose something else. I choose myself. I choose us. I choose life. And the mountains echoed back, yes, yes, yes.